Welcome to EDO Breakthrough, the podcast where we tackle economic development challenges head on. From small towns to bustling cities, every place has its own hurdles to overcome. The EDO Breakthrough podcast creates an environment of collaboration, innovation, and understanding where we can share our real-life challenges and brainstorm solutions. I'm your host, Sandy Dubé, a certified economic developer and founder of PPR Strategies. Each week, we'll be welcoming a different, brilliant, place-based mind to talk through real-life economic development challenges that have been shared with us by you, our gracious listeners. Today, I'm joined by Maureen Krauss with the Detroit Regional Partnership. Maureen, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Sandy. I'm thrilled to be here, especially joining someone who's very respected in your field as well. So it's really a treat for me to be talking with you.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited that you're here. We have seen each other in person at various things, and you came down to Maryland a few years ago and spoke at a conference for us, which was great. So I'm really excited to kind of have a conversation talking about the Detroit region and the upcoming IEDC conference that's happening in Detroit. When this podcast first airs, it'll be within the next couple of weeks of the conference.
Perfect. We'll get it all, get everyone excited about what's to come.
I love it. I love it. So, Maureen, you've been there leading the Detroit Regional Partnership since its inception in the last several years. What has surprised you during that process? How is the evolution of Detroit? What are you seeing? What are you experiencing? What are you a part of?
Yeah, it's a great question, a little loaded, but I'll try to keep it under, an hour in my answer. I'm joking. We were formed because our business leadership thought we could do better in this region, specifically around business attraction. So they went out on their own and looked at best practice around the country. They looked at what size an organization should be. They looked at what budget an organization like this should be. And they looked at what were the deliverables that a region of our size should be delivering to be best of class, right? That was their big, which I greatly appreciate because I want to lead best of class. So, they put together a plan. They brought in McKinsey to work, and Brookings to work on some of the metrics that we were going to use. But they also did something really important. They put together a funding strategy because we know that's a huge challenge in economic development. And they wanted to ensure that from day one, we weren't scrambling to fund our efforts. So they put that all together. When I was brought in, it was a nice foundation. There were a couple things that needed to be tweaked so I could make it, my own, but make it more coming from what a traditional regional economic development program could do. I'm trying to be as diplomatic as possible. And, when you think about it, we were formed in the middle of the pandemic and an economic downturn. Those two things alone were really the hallmarks of the first 3 of our 5 years. Those disruptors, pretty major. I've been really pleased with an amazing team that I have, that we had 10-year metrics, which hint to all, don't put together metrics for 10 years. It's too long. Who knows how many disruptors you're going to have in 10 years, but we had them. So at the 5-year point, which is our last annual report, annual meeting, we are at or exceeding every one of the metrics we are judged by, which is pretty incredible when you consider, once again, pandemic, economic downturn. Really now I would call it tariff uncertainty. How's that? Because we're dealing with it every day. So, but in those first 5 years, over 36,000 direct and indirect new jobs to our region and almost $10 billion in new investment. And almost 8,000 pathway jobs, which is another metric that we count. So we're very metric driven, data driven organization, but the 3 key, I should say 4, also in average wage, up significantly from where judged we would be at this point. So we're pleased with the results. And I think, once again, for a startup that started in an unfortunate time in our country's economy and life, we've done well. And, Sandy, one thing I will say that has changed, and I've been doing this work a few years. It used to be that people would say, "Oh, Detroit, how's everything going there?" in that tone of voice, like we really feel sorry for you. I would say 5 years ago, it was more, "Oh, we're kind of curious what's happening there." Like there was a real curiosity about what was happening. Now it's just straight, "We want to come here. What's going on? What can you find us?" So it really has evolved even over like a 10-year time frame. We do a lot of international work and obviously national work. So it's evolved in a real interesting and positive way.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know that I am looking forward. I couldn't remember. I don't think I've ever been to Detroit. I've been to other places in Michigan. I've been to within the region, but not actually to the city of. And so I'm really excited to come in a few weeks for the IEDC Annual Conference. And I guess I'm curious, what do you hope people take away from a visit, or, this kind of changing mindset, being pleasantly surprised and impressed in areas?
One of the challenges, and all communities have these issues, changing the narrative of perceptions that people have, especially when they're long held perceptions. I mean, Detroit used to be, decades ago, one of the wealthiest cities in the country. It was, top designers. We have amazing architecture here, whatever, and, had quite a significant downturn, but has come back in an amazing way. I always say my favorite candidate to come here is someone who was here 10 years ago and then hasn't been back, because the change over that decade has been extraordinary. My hope is that really it helps change the narrative about what people think about what's happening here. And, I view every person who attends this conference will leave as one of our ambassadors. They will see and experience and feel something quite different than they would have expected just by reading. I don't want to throw national media under the bus, but just by seeing what's out there. It really is an important city to visit. If I had, and region, I should say, if I had an unlimited budget, I'd just bring everyone in for a tour.
Ah, I love it. Yeah, so it is interesting because we talk about Detroit, but then it is definitely the region that we're talking about, or that you're working on. And, I know you've worked in different communities, different sizes, different makeups and stuff. And I think you and I first started talking about this idea of regionalism and why it's important. But can you talk a little bit about what you can accomplish as a region that you may or may not be able to as a single jurisdiction?
Absolutely. And, just to be really clear, there's a super important role for those single jurisdictions as well as for the state. We're the region, our region. So I should tell you, the Detroit region includes the city of Detroit and the 11 surrounding counties, 5.5 million people. 67% of our state's GDP occurs in this region. So a couple of things about regions. Economies are regional, supply chain is regional, and talent is regional. So it makes sense to sell your community as a region, to combine the assets. We can all claim a wonderful international airport and 3 amazing top-level research universities. Just because we're not in that little geographic box of where something like that is located doesn't mean it doesn't belong to all of us. I'm looking out my window right now at the border to Canada. I'm looking at Canada. We all border Canada. When you're in this region, you grow up with, when I was little, I remember Canadian money and Canadian TV. I mean, it's a little different now, right? Between Venmo and, what you can get on the internet. But, that's a part of our DNA here that makes sense for the region to celebrate together. And, important politically, it wasn't always this way in this region. It didn't always get along. But I love that we are not a state or federal formula driven region. We are a region that chooses to work together because we see the power in combining our assets that will allow us to win more. And that's what's happened.
That's awesome. I love that this idea of choice and free will for communities that want to be a part of it. How did those 11 counties each say, "Hey, pick me. I want to be a part of it. It makes sense." Was it your labor shed? Was it, what was it that was the biggest convener of those 11 other counties?
It really was driven by those private sector demographic numbers. What does the supply chain look like? So, of course, we're more than auto, but let's take auto as the example. When you look at a plant, which is a huge economic generator in your community, where does the talent come from? Where does the supply chain come from? That sort of makes a region. Our region is urban, suburban, and rural. We have some rural spots in our region. We have spots in our region that don't want development, and we're very respectful of that, right? But I believe that maybe 15 years ago, it wasn't really popular to have Detroit or to say you were near Detroit or by Detroit. But it became that way. And once again, it's from people who wanted to say, we're only 45 minutes from that OEM plant or tier one supplier, or within, 30 minutes, we have this many engineers, or, advanced manufacturing operations or tool and die companies, whatever it is. We've framed it so that people have access by being a part of this region. And, now it's kind of cool to be a part of the Detroit region. It's different than it was. And like I said, I've worked here in all the evolution of that. But I will say it is a great time to see all the hard work that so many people have put in. I do know I can look back on my career and say I was here in the most transformational decade of the city's history. And that's what excites you every day when you drive into work.
Well, so I love the conversation of talent. What are you seeing as some of the most promising or different workforce initiatives that what are you seeing in Southeast Michigan?
Yeah, a couple of things. Sometimes all communities do this. You take for granted what's already there. So we've been doing some real deep dive studies of our talent to understand what are their transferable skills. So it could be an advanced manufacturing skill that works in auto. What skills would transfer to a different industry like general mobility or defense? So I think, the one thing I will say about our workforce is they're very experienced. So from a manufacturing perspective, they've grown up, their DNA as they've been in these plants, right? These manufacturing operations. Engineering. So we have the second largest concentration of engineering talent in the country. So how do we leverage that for the future? And part of it is informing our university partners, here what the jobs of the future look like. So we just completed a study on what are the 7 subsectors of the mobility industry, which goes beyond cars. What are the sectors that actually are going to grow, that we have the assets to support here? So we only chose 7, and we are looking then at, okay, we have, very like battery storage or whatever. I'll pick a general one. Some of them get very technical. So battery storage, we have the assets. It's a growing sector in mobility, and we have the assets to support it. That informs our business attraction strategy then. So understanding the talent, understanding the skills and who needs them, and then understanding the skills that are transferable is very important.
When you and I first started talking about regionalism, we were talking a lot about mobility. I'd love to hear how you and the Detroit region are transforming what that means. And, really, you mentioned obviously auto manufacturing, but so much more than that in this mobility arena. Can you talk about mobility and what that means for the Detroit region right now?
Yes. So the Detroit region, we led an effort and were successful in becoming one of the 21 Build Back Better communities in the United States. And ours was around mobility. It's called the Global Epicenter of Mobility. When we put it together, we knew we needed to help support companies who were doing this transformation, not just for internal combustion engine to electric vehicle. That's the common one, ICE EV that people talk about. But as you said, it's much more than that. It's mobility for autonomous vehicles. It's mobility for other fuel development besides gas or electric, right? So we put together our application with that in mind, brought every partner we could think of at the table. And one of the things the application required is, how many assets do you currently have in your community to support this industry? Our list had over 400 at the time that we were able to dig up, but they hadn't like worked together or coordinated. Right now, that list is over 2,000 assets. That can be from university research programs to private sector training to, support for companies looking to get government contracts. So, it was very important that we really look at um, uh, all of the existing support that we already have. And we thought, this is ours to lose because these are the jobs of the future. These are the jobs we see globally that are happening and are being supportive. And in some cases, other countries are ahead of us in this space. But it's something that we should be able to, with our talent, with our university partnerships and research, we should be able to continue to own that. So that is what drove this whole idea of putting together the Global Epicenter Mobility. And it's to make sure that there is access to all of these now over 2,000 resources. So we have we have a great program in the city of Detroit called Tech Town. It's affiliated with Wayne State University, and it supports entrepreneurs and small businesses. And they do incredible work. Well, typically it had just been available to people in the city of Detroit. But, our rural partners need that kind of support as well. And so it was to increase access to excellent programs that already exist so that we could make them available to more. Testing is a big thing. So when you're trying out something in automotive or ag equipment, testing is a big deal. We have two of the largest test tracks facilities in the country here. But if you're in, the Flint area, which is maybe an hour away or whatever, you might not know how to get access to that if you're a startup business or a small business. So we've used the funds to provide that access to companies throughout the region. One more piece that we spend a lot of effort on, and that's research. Companies always need access to state-of-the-art research to help give them the right direction, provide them with the data they need to change and adapt. Large companies can have a big research budget. They can afford to do those studies. Our thought was to do that research and provide it to the smaller and medium-sized companies. So when we talked about the future technologies and mobility and the 7 we came up with, that was really to help smaller and medium-sized companies as well as entrepreneurs understand what direction they needed to be going in. We did not want to be in a situation that we were in 2008 and 2009, where, our economy imploded and we had to reinvent ourselves and it took time. We wanted to look at this proactively. Where's the future going? And let's go with it instead of let's wait till we get there and then figure out what we have to do. So that was really a big motivation, providing resources, research, access to companies that wouldn't otherwise be able to do that. Because when we support them and they adapt a new technology or they take their technology and get it to a new market, they grow here. And that is what is going to build our economy.
What are you seeing in terms, for those small businesses or the entrepreneurs? Are they coming to Detroit or the region to test their concepts? Are they hearing about it? Is, the communications and marketing a constant struggle, or are people like, oh my gosh, they got it going on, I'm heading that way?
No, as I mentioned, there is a real interest in what's happening here over the past decade. And, so one of the resources we have that I think is a huge attractor is New Lab is here. They're based in New York City. We're the second one. It's full all the time. Just my last phone call was about what's going on with New Lab and are they full? And, are they going to expand? So a couple of resources like that help with a national footprint, help to attract that talent here. I think that companies that are smaller, but want to, be in auto or adjacent industries, still know this is the sort of place where you can sit next to someone at lunch that's going to be connected, or go to your kid's soccer game and find someone who works in the space for one of the tier ones. We talk about auto all the time. It's a big deal, but probably our most recent success in the mobility space is an Australian company called Fortescue. They do batteries for the mining and ag equipment, so very large scale equipment. They don't sell to automotive at all. What is the application of battery technology to a large scale piece of equipment? That's what we can do here pretty easily because the people and the technology is already being developed here.
And then do you take it a step further in terms of some of the recycling of these materials? And what does the disposal and waste look like? And how are we being good for the environment? Are you seeing any of that type of activity yet?
Yeah, we do have companies that is their sole focus. And, it's interesting. I would say 15 plus years ago, when someone said recycling, you would think, oh, we don't want this in our community. But it's doing the recycling, and then what's next? What are we doing with the recycled materials or parts? And I think when you can tell that whole story, it makes a lot more sense to be looking at that. So yeah, we've certainly seen that. Our goal is to really travel the world proactively and find the most innovative companies in the spaces that make sense here. 60% of our work and success is international companies. So we have a very strong international program. But, find out what we can bring home that makes sense is really key. We'd all love to go on trade missions, to Greece or places like that. That would be super fun. But the reality is we go where there's innovative companies that we think could be a fit here.
Yes. And I'm curious along those lines. Are you seeing, we kind of started the conversation talking about, tariffs and the unknowns and things like that. What are you seeing from Canada and businesses that have operations in both or are looking for expansion? How are you addressing those opportunities or challenges?
I'm looking out and we have a tunnel to Canada, actually 2 tunnels, 3 if you look at our whole region. 1, 2, 3 bridges. The 4th one will be open later this fall. Where the current one in Detroit, over 10,000 vehicles a day, trucks pass over it a day. And there's increased demand and we want it to be more efficient. I would say in general right now, Canada companies making investments are pausing. They're slow rolling their decisions. We still continue to build relationships. Actually, one of my guys is going to be over there this week for 2 days. It's important to build those relationships and make those connections. But there's a definite slowing of decision-making process because of uncertainty. And sometimes you don't know what the tariff's going to be from one day to the next. Companies make very large financial investments in communities, and you need to let them know everything from what are the costs of doing business, what is the time involved in doing business, providing that certainty so they can make the smart decisions they need to. And certainly right now we're in a time where both time and money can be changeable very quickly.
Yes. Yes. Well, and, so here we're coming, I'm going to kind of transition slightly with this idea of bringing in colleagues, all of, our colleagues to Detroit. And we're going to be having similar conversations about, international FDI, other topics. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on Detroit hosting IEDC's annual conference this year. It's a big opportunity, but lots of eyeballs and obviously have lots of stories to tell.
Yeah, we had 165 session proposals for 40 slots. So
I think it was a record. Is that a record? I think that's a record.
I believe so. Yeah.
Good.
A lot of interest. 3 of the 4 hotels are sold out already. If you haven't booked your hotel, get to work or call me and I'll tell you where else to go. I personally am excited because I feel like bringing in peers from all over the world, they understand what it takes to get here. So I think it's going to be an appreciative audience. And I also know that my peers are very excited to talk about where they're at and what's happening, because that's in our DNA if we do this work for any length of time. So I'm excited about, assuming it doesn't snow, which it doesn't snow here in the end of or the middle of September, right? I'm excited for people to have a really positive experience and leave with a positive impression. And like I said, they will be ambassadors for us. And you can never have enough of those.
I totally agree. I really look forward to it. We're this theme of, igniting the future. I love that idea, the kind of the culmination of what Detroit and the story that you have to tell. I'm curious how you see this theme. I think the full theme is catalyzing opportunity, vitality, and prosperity. But how do you see Detroit and, getting behind or being an example of this idea of igniting our future?
Yeah. We have always had, and you've heard the phrases, but, Detroit versus everybody, grit, which is our Lions and us, right? We've always, when you talk to the younger staff and the economy's going down and they're like, oh no, what's happening? It's like, oh, we get through this. Don't worry. We figure it out. We get through it. That's very standard. But, with igniting, I think we're all at a time of hyper speed in the work that we do. And so what are the best components we can put into place to take advantage of the moment? And I do think what the city has gone through, people asked about, well, what was it like with bankruptcy? And I said, well, really, it allowed the city to do what they could not or would not do before. Right? So, yes, it was painful, but it was okay to go through it. We right-sized a lot of things and fixed a lot of things that had taken many, many, many years to deteriorate. We're at a moment right now, though, that we feel really confident based on what we are putting together in the city, that we can basically be a part of any positive, innovative trend. And that's the ignite part that we are excited about is, okay, so what do we do next to really take advantage? Global epicenter mobility is one piece of that, but there are many other components that I know conference goers will get to experience a bit of while they're here.
That's awesome. I love this kind of, thinking about igniting and speed was the word that I just wrote down when you said that. Somebody had asked me a few weeks ago, I facilitate one of the basic economic development courses in Maryland and the Chesapeake Basic Economic Development course. And somebody had asked, us to look at the crystal ball and see where we thought economic development as an industry was going to be in 10, 15 years. And that was one of the things that we had commented was this kind of speed to information, speed to resources, identification, responsiveness, figuring AI out in whatever capacity that means. And so how are we maintaining that relationship, but also doing it in an expedited fashion?
We do always want to be able to be responsive to the speed of our customer. And sometimes that means realigning team members. I have 2 people right now who work full-time on our RFI team. All they do is request for proposals. They fill them out and get accurate information. They're supported by research. They're supported by our verified industrial properties team, our real estate team, so that we can operate at that speed. The other important piece of that, I believe, is storytelling. So, data is pretty accessible. What the data means is not always accessible. So I think that's more a role in research is what does this mean to you? But we have to be, sensitive to the fact that we have to help interpret that data. And that's where storytelling comes in. What does it mean that we have the second largest quantity of engineers in the country here? What does that mean to a company? Access to what types of engineers, as an example. So I think weaving together those trends that we're seeing from a data perspective with the story behind it and why it should be important. One of the things, Sandy, that we've been using lately, not officially, but we are using it, so no one can claim it from us. But people say, well, how would you describe the Detroit region, what you're doing? I said, well, one of my business development guys came up with this, but it's actually pretty accurate. And that's weather, water, and workforce. Those are what distinguish us from others, that combination of all three. And so how do we tell the story of how a company can get success here because of those three major themes that we rate really well in?
Well, and a phrase I love is that data makes you credible, stories make you memorable, and putting some data behind, the weather, the water, and the workforce, and you've got a beautiful story to tell in those areas.
In all three, not just one, right? So that's what makes us stand out. I always tell the team, let's talk about what is different about us than everyone else.
Yes. Well, because every community is unique. Every community has a great quality of life.
I'm not being critical because I've used this in the past too, but live, work, and play.
I know all of it. We've all said it. But I like the weather, water, workforce. Make that your live, work, and play. And how are you doing
weather, water, and workforce enable all the other things, right?
Yeah. That's great. So, one last question I want to wrap up before the conference. And obviously we've talked about first, we wanted your first time attendees to be ambassadors and things like that. Is there something that you'd like should I see something? Is there something I need to see before I leave town?
Whew. Depending on your area of interest, I'm going to maybe say one or two things. I always tell people, if you have just 1 hour in Detroit, go to the Motown Museum. It covers history, innovation, music, which is such a huge part of what we do, how it started from a little house in Midtown Detroit, and it still is a little house in Midtown Detroit with a lot around it. So that's it. I would say something that has transformed, there's two things that have been extraordinarily transformational. Michigan Central is the train station. In the past few years, Ford Motor Company has put $1 billion into that space. It is the most stunning architectural piece of history that is currently in use. And if you really want to have some fun, Google Michigan Central Concert.
Okay.
And you'll see everyone from Diana Ross to Eminem and a lot in between performing. That was incredible. The other thing that has been most transformational, I think, is our Riverfront, Riverwalk. 3 years in a row, it's been voted best in the country. It used to be old industrial facilities. And now it is going to eventually be over a 30-mile loop around the city, but all in front of bordering on the river. I mean, there are parks and there are concert venues and there are hiking trails. It's beautiful. And I think everyone will have an opportunity to spend a little time on the Riverwalk.
Oh my goodness. That sounds amazing. I love it. To wrap up, I've got just a couple more questions. And as a leader in this industry and a fellow member at FM within IEDC, I'm curious, what is your personal North Star? What is it that guides you, keeps you waking up every morning and doing this work?
First, I would say every job is important to the person who has it. So we value every single job that we bring into this community because it's helping a family be better and have better opportunities. So that is certainly absolutely what drives me every morning. And, really the understanding that economic development has a different definition for every community. And you're successful when you understand what that definition is. Our region has 348 cities, villages, and townships. That's a lot of communities to understand, and you just have to ask, is this a priority for you? Do you want this? So I think that, listening to that is really important in order for us to be successful in our work.
That's awesome. So as our final question on every episode, in support of the title of the podcast, I like to ask, what was your economic development breakthrough?
I spent early in my career 3 years in Phoenix doing economic development. And I had been in Michigan a couple of years, like college intern a couple of years, then moved to Phoenix. And I ran a small, at the time, community economic development program in Peoria, Arizona. And I learned a couple things right away that have stayed with me. First thing I learned is when I went and asked for where are all the greenfield sites, they looked at me like, what are you talking about? Because nothing's really green in Arizona, they're brown. Brownfield sites in Michigan mean a lot different thing than in Arizona, right? So I'm like, okay, that's good. Then they told me, I asked about a tax abatement. Oh, those are illegal here. I'm like, what? How am I going to do this work if there's no tax abatements? In Arizona, communities are funded through sales tax, not property tax. So we would literally do development agreements for car dealerships because that generated the most revenue for a city. And I thought, man, I hope my friends in Detroit don't hear this. I mean, I'm used to dealing car plants, not dealerships. But it really, and then, so that was one thing. I'm, trying to win car dealerships. But when I was there, the project I did was the first 2-team spring training facility for Major League Baseball. And you know what, the community, and I'm a huge baseball fan, so it was super fun. We can do a whole separate podcast on that. Super fun. But, what I learned is that economic development is different in every community. Kind of what I said earlier. So these things about what drives tax revenue, what is important for a community, what are their priorities, you have to really understand a community to be successful in economic development. And so that's why what I've taken with me wherever I've gone is to really understand priorities, needs, and how to get it done.
Wow, I love that. I agree. Every community is different. Sometimes we forget that. It is important to ask the questions and ask the stakeholders, over 300 different municipalities in your region there. And with the Detroit Regional Partnership, that's amazing. I love that your team, the team that created the organization, set you up with some funding and kind of the best practices and metrics. I think that there's so much here, and I love watching the growth that you and the region are experiencing, and that you are helping to facilitate in the role that you're serving now. I applaud you for that, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
You're welcome. We're having fun.
That's great. You haven't stopped smiling this entire conversation, so I love it.
I waited a long time for this moment, and we're here, and we're going to love every minute of it.
It is awesome. Well, I can't wait to see you in September 2025 in Detroit, and I have no doubt you will have nearly 2,000 new ambassadors for the region. So thank you for your work.
You're welcome. Thanks for this opportunity. I really appreciate talking with you.
Thanks, Maureen. It was great. Well, thank you to our listeners. Thank you for staying with us. We'll have some details in the show notes with links to the different programs and initiatives that we discussed today. And until next time, thanks for listening.
EDO Breakthrough Podcast is brought to you by PPR Strategies. PPR Strategies, standing for People and Places Reimagined, is a strategic consulting firm working specifically with EDOs and other place-based organizations. We share the unique stories of communities through communication, strategic planning, marketing, media relations, and more. Visit us at pprstrategies.com and find our contact information in the show notes. I'd like to give a big thank you to you for listening. Remember, together we are unstoppable.